Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Alicia Smith, and I am the Executive Director of Dyslexia Canada. Today's webinar is a part of our Spotlight series of webinars where we invite educators from across Canada to share their experiences with transitioning their practices to align with the science of reading, structured literacy, and the recommendations of the Ontario Human Rights Commission's Right to Read inquiry. Before we get started, I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous people of all of the lands that we are joining on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I'd like to take this time to acknowledge the importance of the lands in which we all call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improve our own understanding of local Indigenous people and their culture. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this country. Thank you. And before I introduce the team from Near North, and I'm very excited for today's presentation, I just wanted to do a quick housekeeping item and ask everyone to please use the question and answer function at the bottom of your screen. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation, so please use that Q&A function. If you would like to chat with the other guests who are here, share resources, that sort of thing, you're welcome to do that as well. The chat function is enabled for that purpose. And any resources that are shared in the chat, we will make a list of those and send them out to you following the presentation. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Stephen Krause to introduce his team. Thank you. Welcome, Stephen.
Well, thank you very much, Alicia, and thank you, Dyslexia Canada, for this opportunity to share a bit of our journey. My name is Steve Krause, and I am a K-12 Student Achievement and Wellbeing Principal for the Near North District School Board. And I would like to start by stating that our literacy efforts have at times felt like we were throwing one rock down, stepping on it, throwing another rock down, stepping on it, and really trying to get across a large expanse of water. And we realize that we're not the only ones who are attempting this crossing, and that there are many common threads in this work across school districts. So thank you to the school boards and passionate educators that we've been learning from along the way. It is our hope that as we share our story, it will promote reflection and leave you with ideas to consider in your work, given your unique contexts. At this time, I'd like to introduce my colleagues who I will be co-presenting with this afternoon. So the first is Kara Macie. Kara Macie is a member of our literacy team, but her actual job is the lead speech pathologist for our district. And Christopher Walking, who is my counterpart, so he is a K-12 Student Achievement and Wellbeing Principal as well. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Chris.
I think it's actually to me.
Oh, perfect.
Right. Yeah. So I was sort of going to set the stage for all of the work that has been going on in our board over the past many years. And really, for me, the genesis for all of this began around 10 years ago. So around that time, the special education department was being buried in referrals for professional assessments. And, we were really having a hard time keeping our head above water. In fact, we weren't keeping our head above water. The number of referrals that were coming in was just too large for us to manage. So then we put a process in place called the pre-referral meeting process. And the idea behind that was that we would meet with school teams. And so this would be the spec ed assessors, so there'd be the psychometrist, speech language pathologist, and then school teams. And we would sort of collaboratively go over the students that they had concerns about and try to determine next steps, prioritize the referrals, sometimes, recommend interventions. Sometimes it would lead to an immediate referral, going in. for psych ed or a language assessment. And, during those meetings, literacy was almost always the main area of concern. It was reading and writing, sometimes math, but almost always literacy. Next slide, Chris. So during those meetings, teachers would come to give their profiles of the students that they wanted to discuss. And they were always describing the students' reading by their reading level. So, they would present their student and say this, be a grade 2 student, and say this child is reading at a level C or a level D. And, sort of this year after year, as these meetings kind of went on, the same students were being brought up repeatedly, and really very little movement through any of those levels that they were presenting. They would often be getting stuck somewhere between level A and level D. Sometimes we have, some students being presented a little higher along those levels, maybe F or G. But the teachers seem to be really at a loss of why and how to support. And then in addition to the reading levels, writing samples would be, put out on the table, and we would all take a look, and I would immediately see evidence of, significant phonologically based spelling errors. I'd see orthographic and spelling pattern errors, but that level of analysis never seemed to be part of the discussion. Instead, discussions were centered more around things like, motivation, generating ideas, the quantity of what the student was writing. And then that sort of drove the instructional responses. Like, it was like, okay, so how do we improve motivation? How do we help him generate ideas? And then on my end, I was asking questions like, well, what is she able to read? What is she able to do? And the teachers would often, again, explain to me, oh, well, she's reading, she can read level D books. And, I would say, okay, so what do we have to do then to get her to move to level E or F? Like, what's the instructional move here that needs to happen? And again, the teachers would often, just say, well, she needs to read more level D books until she's ready for level E. So I was always a little bit confused during these meetings, and probably because I'm not an educator and I wasn't, completely familiar with the approach or the resources being used. I was sort of always leaving the meetings thinking, I was always just confused and a little frustrated that, things just weren't jiving for me at all in those discussions. And usually what ended up happening is, after these discussions, after the student had been brought up, a couple of years at these pre-referral meetings, eventually somewhere in the junior grades, they'd be, recommended for a psych ed assessment. Assistive technology would be, provided to access content. And that's sort of how we proceeded. Next slide, Chris. And so for me, I started to see it as a problem of practice, that the reading instruction that was happening in our schools, was really missing a critical foundational piece, that those developing those code-based skills, those skills that, a really high percentage of our students need to have taught explicitly. And in our school and in all of our schools, we have amazing teachers. They were doing exactly what they were trained to do. They were following exactly the curriculum, our provincial curriculum, and using the resources that they had been provided. So our teachers were doing everything that they knew to do. But for me, I was just like, there's a piece here that doesn't seem to be being addressed. So really this went on for several years, and sadly, because I was the one feeling like the square peg in this equation, I just kind of kept quiet and, didn't really, take it on. And until I had an experience while I was away on a vacation around 2016, that shook me up so much that it was at that moment that I decided I was going to try to do something. I was going to try and help in some way, and I was going to give it everything I had. So it started small. It started with me just providing some really informal PD to, a resource teacher, another resource teacher. And then it started to spread a little bit where that resource teacher would then, be talking in a staff room, and then there'd be another teacher or two who would be interested in the information. And I'd be asked, like, would I come after school and just do a little informal PD with them? So it sort of spread slowly, but steadily, and got to the point where even it spread in some schools where the school principal, would invite me to come and speak at a staff meeting. So I kind of just kept planting seeds around foundational reading skills, core literacy skills, and it continued to spread. And then it was around 2018 that I was introduced to Chris. And with that, sort of the reach became a bit broader because he introduced me to our system vice principals. And I sort of continued with that group to really press for research aligned instruction and, trying to talk about resources. And then there started to be some tension in our system. I perceived it as, the tension was really around a specific part of what I was saying, and it was about the explicit instruction in phonics and decoding, following a scope and sequence using decodable text. And so the tension that I was experiencing was that there was a group of teachers who were now having sort of this aha moment, and sort of another group that were like, absolutely not, this is not how we teach reading. So these tensions were building. I was called into a meeting where I was asked to press pause on providing any more informal PD. And at the time I was really devastated, and I interpreted it as I was being asked to sort of stay in my lane. And, sort of felt very like, oh, it had kind of hit a dead end. And remember, this is all happening like well before the right to read was even announced. So maybe here, Chris, you can speak to what was sort of happening at that time around in the admin exec level.
Yeah, thanks, Kara. And I think, what you're describing is a real pedagogical shift. And it bumps up against some pretty long established beliefs around how students learn to read, what learning looks like in general, and the resources and tools that we've used to monitor progress in that regard. So, I can remember those conversations well in some of those meetings. I think it's important as we engage in this work to acknowledge that there will be necessary tensions in the work, because we're pushing up against some strongly held beliefs at the classroom level or even at the system level. And I think what Kara was experiencing is there had to be some form of reconciliation, coming to terms with the fact that the tools that we were using, the professional learning that we were providing to educators, the pedagogical approaches we were endorsing were falling short. There was a bit of a grieving process in that. That in itself wasn't new, because we saw the decline in student achievement. We saw students were, increasingly struggling to learn how to read. And as a system, I would say we didn't quite know how to address that. So when Kara started, and again, it was through a superintendent at the time who really believed strongly that program and spec ed needed to have a strong alignment. That our gifts, so to speak, were different, and we would benefit and be stronger as a system if we work collaboratively. So she worked very intentionally with the program, the spec ed principal working with the spec ed superintendent working with the program superintendent to start to facilitate some of these meetings, and that brought Kara and I to the same table. And I think where a program might have that, the pedagogical expertise, what we were really lacking is that precise understanding of how kids learn how to read. And it became apparent very quickly that teachers didn't have this content knowledge. So, when we talk about sort of pushing pause, I think what was happening there is there was a conversation happening in the background is, okay, we recognize this is a monumental shift, but how are we going to, go about implementing this change while maintaining some sense of coherence without overwhelming the teachers in classrooms. So what are those incremental first bites, and how do we start to grow this slowly so that we will realize success? But yeah, absolutely. I remember those meetings well, and I acknowledge there were some tense moments at that level, and again throughout the work. I think that's continued, but I believe that they're necessary and part of the learning, because this is a disruption to what we have known.
Yeah, I agree. Next slide there. Yeah, so like Chris said, like it's complex and it's messy, and there's really strong emotions attached to literacy and literacy instruction. But I felt really strongly that if we could get our teachers to a point where they could have that content knowledge about how the brain learns to read, and really understand the systems of language, like so that they had a better understanding of phonology and morphology and vocabulary and syntax, and how we develop automaticity and fluency, and what roles those play in comprehension, the more confident they would be in being able to support their students. And that they don't necessarily need to be experts in all of those things, but I think there's a threshold of understanding that needs to be developed. And so in those early days, when it was really just Chris and I, we really wanted to focus on that PD part. And Chris, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that initial PD that we had planned for kindergarten and grade 1, and then the 4-part webinar series and how that whole piece played out.
Yeah, sure. So again, as our partnership began to grow, we intentionally thought, okay, we will start some work with in our full day kindergarten programs with ECs and educators. And we had developed a sequence of learning that really, the intention was to grow a deeper understanding of the core foundational skills that allow students to learn how to read. Really digging into some of the decoding pieces and introducing resources that would support the development of phonemic awareness and so forth. So we had received approval and received funding to implement those learning opportunities. And we had a series of regional sessions planned. And of course, fall 2019, I think we ran into some issues around with labor, which prevented us from going ahead in person. And that year, obviously 1920 was also the year that the pandemic hit in March. And we had done a lot of work in preparation for that. And again, the labor piece had settled, but we were in pandemic, we were at home, and there seemed to be this, it was almost like a calm before the storm, where we thought, okay, this might be a great opportunity to launch some of this learning. So Kara offered to provide a series of webinars to staff. And again, I think this curiosity is innate, because again, it goes back to these questions around, I know that my students are struggling. I can see that they're struggling, but I'm not quite sure how to help them. So this webinar series was incredibly well attended. Like hundreds of teachers were attending these PD sessions, and it was presented as a series, a 4-part series. And it really, I think Kara was a spark for the system, was that sort of that first bite that ignited a passion for this work. And I really saw that as a springboard to the questions and the curiosities that teachers had over the next 3 years.
Yeah, and I would say it was that teacher curiosity and interest that really kept the motivation and everything moving forward. After each of those webinar series, I mean, I wish I had screenshot my email inbox of just like email after email of teachers, reaching out and saying, I knew it, I knew there was something, or there was something I was missing, or this is so exciting, I can't wait till September to start, and others, challenging. And yeah, so it was really, I think it had big impact.
I think it was the first time. I think it was the first time that teachers really, because initially I think teachers didn't know what they didn't know. And I feel like this webinar series was really our first almost awakening, if you will, in some ways. Yeah, it was very powerful.
Yeah, it really felt that way. And then, so that sort of, COVID, we were shut down through the rest of the spring. And then come that fall in September, an admin team was assigned to support this work moving forward. So, so it was Chris and I, and then 2 additional principals. So we had Steve join us, and then we had another principal, Lori Forth, who has since retired. So there was a team of us who sort of were assigned to take these next steps. So we met in the fall and had really great discussions. And I think it was during some of those discussions where Chris had sort of tasked me with, narrowing down some priorities. The shift was going to be so big and there was so much work ahead that we really wanted to sort of narrow our focus down, and have some, a more focused priority list to go at. So, again, this is before the right to read, and having chosen these priorities and then now see what happened with the right to read. It's nice to see that we were on really solid ground, because the 3 priorities at that point that I identified was, number 1, we had to align our tier 1 classroom instruction with scientific evidence. The number 2 was we were to identify risk early through universal screening, and 3, we were going to intervene early. So, again, it was really nice when, eventually the right to read was launched, and report came out that what we had seen as our, sort of blueprint aligned with what the eventual recommendations came with the right to read. So we just set out to do the work. We built out this roadmap and started to move things forward.
Kara, when I think back to those webinars too, I think like there were some anchor concepts and models that you had shared with educators that I think were easily grasped. The one that jumps out in this moment is Scarborough's rope.
Yeah.
Like, that metaphorical representation of learning how to read. And I think it was just, it's such a simple, there's complexity in the simplicity, if you know what I mean. But just the way that teachers were able to latch on to that and start to really think intentionally about, okay, what do we value when and why? And this whole understanding around, okay, the decoding as a foundation for learning how to read.
Yeah, and I mean, to this day, every PD session that we've offered over the last, 4 or 5 years, that Scarborough's rope framework is always embedded in everything we do. It sort of helps sort of categorize the pieces of PD that we are focusing on in each session. So that's been sort of that through line throughout most of what we've done, since that time, for sure.
And staying consistent to those models over time and allowing teachers to really anchor their thinking around them.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so strategic investments in tools and resources. This is such an important topic for us. And yeah, we'd like to talk a little bit about why this feels like it was really such a critical piece. But Kara, I'm wondering if you would like to start off by just sharing some of the initial purchases and the thinking around that as we began to align some of our structured literacy programming and resources.
Yeah, sure. So again, this would be going back to fall of 2019. And we were looking for, what could be that first move, that first bite that could be rolled out relatively quickly and easily. And again, we were focusing in at that point just on kindergarten, so that was early primary years. And so Chris and I, so we landed sort of on the Haggerty program for phonemic awareness for our kindergarten classrooms. And, the appeal of Haggerty at the time was that it was scripted. There was very little prep required, a quick routine that could be done, with, 8 minutes of, in the day. And it would get kids thinking and working with words and word structure in a more explicit way. They'd start to become aware of words and syllables and sounds. And when done right, it can be, really fun. There's lots of movement, getting kids up out of their chairs and moving around, and lots of gestures. So the uptake from our teachers with that resource was really quick, and they were, reporting almost immediate impact in their classrooms. So that piece got moving really, really quickly. And then the next question we were trying to, answer was, what were we going to pilot for the phonics decoding piece? And, we knew we wanted to sort of start it as a pilot. And, the loudest criticism for, the use of decodable text and, a phonics program was that they were historically sort of seen as boring and unappealing. So right out of the gates, the conversations that Chris and I were having was that whatever we were going to choose to pilot, it had to be really high quality decodable text. So we sampled, several different resources at the time. And again, remember, this is back in 2019. And we landed on Flyleaf Publishing. So their reputation for having really high quality decodable books still exists now. But we were really happy to see that even their teacher resource manual was aligned with a structured literacy approach. It's, a scripted manual that helps build that teacher knowledge. There's a clear scope and sequence from, simple to more complex. There's cumulative practice, high impact, consistent instructional routines like say it and move it, phoneme, grapheme mapping, word chains, lots of those really good high impact pieces. So nice explicit instruction and that lesson to text matching, because that was something that was going to be a new concept for our teachers, that you provide the lesson and build the skills, and then the text will help match, it will match that instruction. We really wanted to put books in front of kids that would reinforce the learning that was happening in the lesson. So, try to build that decoding muscle, eliminate all the guessing strategies that had been, part of the instruction prior. So, Flyleaf was a really great first step. Since then, we've certainly added lots of other decodable book sets. There seems to be really great ones being released almost monthly now, but, we were really happy with the series that we started with.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll talk a little bit further down in the presentation about how we rolled out some of that Flyleaf. But really, our next decision after the Flyleaf and the Haggerty was bringing a universal screening tool into play, because we really wanted to be able to accurately determine and monitor over time students who were struggling with their reading. So we started by asking you, Kara, to evaluate 3 universal screeners for us that had appeared in the ministry PPF titled Professional Assessments and Systematic Evidence-Based Reading Programs. And so you evaluated for us Acadience, Dibbles, and AIMSweb assessments. And the decision was made to go with Acadience for a number of reasons, including it was very well researched. It was widely used, and we knew that Acadience wasn't an organization that was going to fold a couple months down the road. And we had educator input. We had the chance to pilot Acadience and have some of our literacy intervention teachers use the tools and be able to kind of debrief and talk about their assessment of them. And then the other piece that really drew us to Acadience was that it was a suite of tools that would support all the way from kindergarten through grade 8. And one of the pieces that we were particularly interested in was their progress monitoring, and really using that system to look at a student's reading trajectory and to be able to effectively not only determine if the student was progressing, but taking that fact and looking at, okay, what are we doing with our instruction and intervention? And if the student isn't progressing at a rate that's acceptable, what do we need to change and do differently in how we present? So two other resources, and again, you're looking at a slide that has multiple resources on them, and we're not going to talk about them all, but two that were significant for some different reasons for us. So one was Lexia Power Up. And in this decision to go with Lexia Power Up, and we initially purchased, I believe, 500 licenses for our system, we did it because we wanted to have something that immediately addressed the intermediate students who were struggling, and would provide them with explicit instruction in order to help them. And we are of the opinion that we hadn't built enough teacher capacity and hadn't really done enough as a system in supporting our educators in supporting these students. And so we purchased the Lexia Power Up and got students kind of engaged with it immediately, and then began to build capacity, almost as a second piece. So we led with the resource and then built capacity afterwards. Yeah. And
I mean,
go ahead.
Well, I think there's something in there to unpack and maybe talk a little bit about, because it's sort of a chicken and the egg question, but putting the resource in teachers' hands and then supporting the use of the resource, I think certainly in the case of Lexia, I would say it's true with Flyleaf as well. I would echo the same with certainly Haggerty. As teachers began to use the resources, they became more familiar with, number one, the core skills, the scope and sequence for developing reading in students. But then they also started to be able to refine their lens as to what success looked like, and it became much more precise and incremental. And we started to develop a common language across teachers about what we were looking at. Like, we were valuing the same things all of a sudden across schools. So the standardized resources helped us establish a common language around language development or reading.
Yeah, I agree, Chris. And I feel like it really grounded the learning in a way that when you lead with professional development, you don't have some of that same that same benefit. So yeah, so that was a kind of an important decision for us, and an important resource that we put in place. And the other one that I just wanted to mention here today was the decision to purchase UFly foundations. And interesting, I was thinking actually as Kara was speaking of the similarities between UFly and Haggerty. I mean, obviously Haggerty is phonemic awareness. UFly is very much a phonics decoding program, but their simplicity in use and how very prescribed they are, there are definitely some commonalities. But we just thought, oh, you know what, this is a fairly new resource. We don't want to invest heavily in it because we don't know kind of, how it's really going to be received and evaluated over time. And so we initially just distributed one copy per school. And I think it was literally like days before we were getting requests for multiple copies. And educators really took to the resource. It was a resource that they could very quickly get their heads around and implement with their students. And again, it was a resource where they didn't necessarily have to have a ton of knowledge initially. They could grow with the students, and they could build their knowledge as they were using the resource. All right, next slide, please. All right, so growing a depth of expertise. We knew this was huge. We knew in order for people to take that very large step of shifting their beliefs on how students read and shifting their practices on how to best teach reading and writing, we knew we needed really to have solid expertise. And so Yeah, so we wanted to make sure that we had that expertise in all of our buildings. And here we are now, we're kind of right in the second year of COVID. We have supply shortages, and the models that we've typically used for professional development are no longer an option. So using an asset lens, we decided to work intensively with our group of early learning intervention teachers. And we chose this group, and this group was just under 50 educators, because one, they had a foundational understanding and experience to start with. These are educators who've been working with kids and helping kids who were struggling with their reading and writing for, some of them for years. And so there really was an amazing foundation to start with these educators. From a logistical point of view, they had more flexibility in their schedules than some other groups, and they often didn't need supply coverage, which was huge for us at this time. Kara led this learning, and we met bi-weekly. So we went at it pretty hard. We met bi-weekly. Our sessions were between an hour and 2 hours, and we focused on building their core knowledge. We collected and analyzed student diagnostic data together. We explored resources such as Really Great Reading, Acadians, Core Phonics, and Flyleaf. During this period of time, we revised the literacy intervention manual with their input, and that was really significant for us because we really, for the first time, we're kind of mandating a pre and post data assessment of the students, as well as progress monitoring during the course of the intervention period. And that group of literacy intervention educators, they were our core group who received Acadians training. So they attended 2 days in the summer, and they helped us get ready for what was going to be a soft launch of the screener in September of 2021. We think this work with this group was really really monumental for us, in that it established a community of educators who were passionate and knowledgeable about not only just about literacy and helping students, but also about some of our newest resources that we were using. I think I would argue, because of what they brought to the table, they moved very quickly, and they grasped things very fast, and their knowledge was built at quite a fast rate. And it did exactly what we were hoping, is that it provided us a literacy champion in every school. So as we were getting ready to implement some pieces system-wide, we had somebody in the buildings who would be able to support their colleagues. Next slide, please. Okay, so yeah, thinking about quality implementation.
Yeah, sorry, my mic was muted there. So I think we've told the story to a certain point in time. I think it's worth reflecting on some of the intentional and maybe not intentional leadership moves that I think have allowed the project to be successful over time. We've rooted a lot of our school improvement planning work and subsequently literacy or math initiative work around the ideas that are held in Donahue and Katz's work, Hattie's work related to collective efficacy. And when we think about implementation, initially, I think with any major initiative, the catalyst sits in the middle of the organization. And, certainly Kara was an intentional disruption and became a critical friend to our program team. And, we've worked as a singular team since that time, once that relationship was established. And I think we've worked now intentionally with the story that Steve had just told around working with the Eli teachers. That was an initial move to shift ownership from the middle of the organization into the schools. These teachers were working with students. They were actively evaluating resources, providing feedback on resources, but also observing the impact that these resources were having in helping students learn how to read. And in that, I think they were developing efficacy in and of themselves, their abilities. They started to realize that their actions and the effective use of these tools were making a difference for the children that they served. And they started to own the work. And, alongside this, I think, at this time, the buzz, I would call it the buzz, but the work in the Ontario Human Rights Commission's right to read inquiry was starting to ramp up, and there were some initial reports. And I think just generally across the province, there was an intensified interest in this problem of practice. We started to orient. Kara described some very specific goals around being able to identify risk early and being able to intervene with effective tools and provide timely interventions. And we started to establish some shared understanding of what our goals were with this work. And it's, I think, one thing for a principal at the system level to articulate a goal, but when it comes from the mouth of a teacher in a school who's working directly with students, it resonates completely differently in the building. So again, building that capacity and naming it, honoring the excellence that sits in the crowd and naming that excellence and acknowledging their voice in our selection of tools, I think created a culture where teachers saw that this wasn't something that was being done to them, but they're very much part of the journey. We started to develop a common understanding of what do we value, when, and why. And along the way, I think we've started to build trust. We have, and I think we'll get into this a little bit later, but we've had ongoing conversations with our federation partners around this work. We've been empathetic and receptive to teachers through this change process, understanding that implementation overload is a thing, and we need to be sensitive to that, and we need to move carefully in response. And ultimately, really thinking about how the work that we're doing now will be sustained in the years to come. We've acknowledged the challenges of annualized funding in public education in Ontario. Building plans with annual funding can be challenging because the resources that we have in one year, we may not the next. So how do we work very precisely to develop the capacity in schools to sustain this work over time? And that doesn't mean working autonomously, but building collaborative models that are really part of our culture and result in a permanent change in our fundamental beliefs around how kids learn. And a lot of this thinking is rooted in a book that Donohue and Katz wrote in 2019 called Quality Implementation. But certainly, as we think about our work at the system level and we think about the implementation, I think we can notice and name the specific moves that have resulted in degrees of success.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And just kind of before I get into this slide, like I'm very interested in the I guess it's the power of the concept around de-implementation and what that really means. Like I feel like that's really significant in this literacy conversation. Again, it goes back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier, where we were asking people to shift their beliefs and their practices. But it's that the implementation has that de-implementation component, which is significant.
And the tensions that come with that. I mean, I think we were speaking to that even from the initial conversations our central team was having with Kara and all the way through. I think the displacement or the de-implementation it's messy work. It can be emotional work and it can be challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. So classroom embedded professional learning. So one of the things that we knew before COVID, and we knew much better after COVID shifted the ways that we worked, was that classroom embedded professional learning was critical in building knowledge with educators. So as we were moving towards system implementation of some of our structured literacy resources and shifting some practices, it became clear that we needed, again, that expertise working alongside educators. We wanted them to be able to support knowledge and skill acquisition through modeling, through co-teaching, supporting conversations, being involved in staff meetings in schools, and assisting administration and school teams with their school improvement work, and using the iterative cycles of improvement. So this past September in 2022, 4 school-based literacy facilitator regional roles were created to support classroom and school embedded professional learning. And the impact of this literacy team is great. To keep it to a really simple word, over the course of this year, they will have directly supported all of our 27 elementary schools in the district, guided learning in all 6 of our secondary schools. They have co-led professional development for administrators. They have provided and guided the development of system professional development days. They have provided after-hours professional learning opportunities in response to the needs that have arisen over the course of the year. We knew this year was going to be a challenge to have a Cadence benchmark data collected, but this group was instrumental in our ability to collect screening data on almost 4,300 kids to date. So there were a lot of models in this. And Kara, maybe you can support this part of the conversation as well. Like, these models, I think, are important for people to hear.
Just to give people a matter of perspective, we're a smaller size board, just under 10,000 students across our entire K-12 system.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Chris. So yeah, so some of those models, like, so we really wanted this data to be collected and these assessments to take place. And so, we've got our team of 4, and they kind of hit the schools with this as one of their priorities. So certainly they themselves conducted a fair number of assessments. I don't want to give an exact number, but I would say it was probably moving towards almost half of the assessments that we've completed to date. They've had a direct hand in. Other models, they've sat next to and co-administered the assessment with teachers, with the idea that we're really just kind of getting teachers to a place of knowledge and comfort in doing it independently. Kara,
I think probably that was, sorry, I was going to say, I think initially in those beginning of year benchmarks, that was certainly what it was looking like. But I think, now that we've passed the middle of year benchmarks, I think there was more of a gradual release, and there are many teachers in our systems who have really taken this on and really wanted to do their own benchmark assessments. So yeah, I think there's sort of a variety across the system, from the lit facilitators taking on still the lion's share to, in other places where it is the classroom teachers now who are comfortable enough with the process that they are collecting their own classroom data, which is a really nice shift to see.
I think one thing that is significant in this conversation is that we were really eager to get that data, and so we tried. Like, we did have different models. We hired some teachers who were not completely full-time with their assignments, and so we gave them some point FTE to support assessments, really just whatever we could do to support schools and teachers in getting this work done, we were game to explore, because we knew once we had the data in hand that it was going to help us in our conversations around the importance of it and what it shows us and teaches us. So back to our school-based literacy facilitators. So I just want to read very quickly a statement made by one of our principals around the impact the school-based literacy facilitator had in her school. And so she writes, for what feels like the first time, we've been supported with the rollout and implementation of meaningful assessment tools which enable us to use data to drive intervention and instruction and to purposefully monitor the growth of our students and, I lost my place there, the growth of our students and to determine where our intensive intervention is necessary. Working with our school-based literacy facilitator has also enabled our staff to be part of the sharing of resources, followed by support using these resources in a meaningful way in the classroom, while enabling educators to eventually use these resources independently. So this comment was really representative of, we just finished kind of doing some school effectiveness conversations across our system, and the impact of this team has really been very consistently applauded. So so that's something that we're feeling great about. And as Kara mentioned earlier, this work is complex, and from our perspective, without having knowledgeable and skilled educators supporting their colleagues at their various starting points, growth would occur at a rate that would never generate the necessary momentum for system change. So, it's been really an important piece of our work.
A critical role, absolutely. So when we think about, again, the literacy leadership at the school level, we're not just thinking about principals, but we're thinking about how we're engaging teachers as leaders as well. We think we need to take time to help school leaders understand this work. And again, I want to emphasize, when we say school leaders, we're not necessarily just saying administrators. We're acknowledging that teachers are leaders in this work. Understanding that that the content knowledge piece, as well as and the complexity in developing this content knowledge, will take time. But we have built, again, whether it be through the school improvement planning process or whether it be through the professional learning collaborative inquiries, LIFT projects, Learning Innovation Fund for Teacher projects, and interesting survey of teacher interest in learning. We do an application process for the Learning Innovation Fund for Teachers. So this is again a small pocket of funding that we receive from the ministry to support the development of evidence-based instructional approaches in classrooms, but it's teacher-led learning. And this year we had 21 projects approved, 17 of which are focused in literacy. So you think about where teachers' minds are at right now in our system, and they really do own this work and are incredibly curious to learn more. But again, that speaks to alignment and creating opportunities through things like LIFT, optimizing time in schools through staff meetings or classroom embedded supports, help to move the work forward and help to move towards sustainability at the school level, really anchoring our conversations in the why behind the what. And Steve talked about, the importance of collecting the data as part of this. And really, it comes down to the evidence to inform our understanding of impact over time. I truly believe that when teachers recognize that their actions make a difference for the students that they serve, and they see growth, that becomes an incredibly powerful experience, a catalyst for change.
Can I just add one piece to that, Chris?
Yeah, please.
So, I think that in a way that I hadn't really experienced before, we saw educators who really wanted this knowledge. I mean, I feel like we have a strong group of instructional leaders in our buildings across our board. But you know, I know that we did that fall PD literacy day with them, and really from that point forward, there just seemed to be an eagerness to be involved and to be really closely connected with this work. And yeah, as I know, we all know this, but that's a game changer.
Absolutely. And it's an ownership shift in terms of who's driving the work. And you know, when I think back, even when we talk about this as a participatory process, like it's a collaborative process, the fact that a lot of, you know, these tools, these whether we call them screeners, diagnostic assessments, progress monitoring tools, teachers have had input. They've been consulted. We've presented options. We've gathered feedback. And yes, we want to identify the most effective tools ultimately, but along the way, we also want to identify efficient tools. And those were all part of the conversations. So when we think about a principal in a building asking teachers to gather this information, it sounds a lot different when we can acknowledge that teacher voice has been part of identifying the tool, and it's with purpose. I mentioned the notion of mastery experiences, but I do think it's critical. And some of this work, when we talk about leadership principles as instructional leaders, creating the conditions for teachers to have mastery experiences, but also to engage in social persuasion and to have vicarious experiences. So, you know, an example would be teachers working with Haggerty, and they see a significant difference in how their students are able to segment phonemes, or maybe put them back together and make words. It's tangible evidence of impact, and it builds teacher efficacy. So the teacher then goes into the staff room and says, "You wouldn't believe what my kids did today. Check this out." And it becomes contagious. And then somebody else says, well, how did you do that? Oh, Haggerty. And it really has started to catch on like a fire lit from one classroom to the other. And we can see that now, you know, when we talk about it through the lens of sustainability or ownership, the teachers are truly invested in the work. And there's a social aspect to this learning. And again, I think it's mirrored in the provincial context with all of the culture and the community that's now built around the Ontario Right to Read inquiry.
All right. It seems really important to note in this overall presentation that as we've been involved over the past few years in improving our understanding of how to analyze and use students' reading assessment data, that data to inform instruction and make school and system level decisions regarding the allocation of resources, that as a system, we also were doing similar learning in other content areas, such as mathematics, in our equity and well-being work, in, again, our school improvement work, including the multi-year strategic 6-week iterative cycles of improvement that all our schools engage in over the course of the year. So an example of this learning and literacy is our deepening understanding of the various types of literacy assessments: screener, diagnostic, progress monitoring, really understanding that using a tool with fidelity is critical for the data to be reliable, and really understanding and learning about how to not only plot but also work with students' reading trajectories. On April 28th, just a couple of weeks ago, we brought in Una Malcolm from Bright Light Learners and also a member of the board of directors of IDA Ontario. And she presented during our System PD Day to the elementary panel. She did a presentation titled "Using Assessment to Drive Literacy Instruction and Inform Our Understanding of Growth." And at the secondary level, she did a presentation on understanding and supporting struggling readers through assessment and monitoring. So as you can tell from the titles of those presentations, really, really important foundational pieces. And one of the things that was really neat was especially in her elementary presentation, is that presentation was delivered to all elementary teachers, not just teachers who were, directly involved with literacy, because we know literacy is not content, not discipline specific, but yeah, really, really powerful. And the conversations that have, ensued following her presentations, and really a day focused on some of our literacy work has been significant.
Steve,
So,
just before we move to the next slide, and I know we're
yeah.
running close to the end of our time here, but I think it's important, if we're thinking as system leaders, if we're asking teachers to collect data, it's with purpose, and that the data is relevant, and first and foremost, it informs their actions with students in classrooms. But also, as it starts to filter up to the school and system level, how are we responding to the data that teachers are collecting as they gather this information? Purposeful investment in resources, proportional allocations or responsive allocations of staffing, professional learning. It doesn't just get siphoned up into a chart that means something to somebody far away. It's first and foremost relevant in the classroom, but it also informs system actions.
Yeah, no, for sure. And really, yeah, I feel like just my closing thought around that is I feel like, although it wasn't incredibly intentional initially, there was a good outcome, and that was that we've used literacy data to help our system grow in really our understanding of data literacy, and that's been just a really nice bonus as we collectively grow in our knowledge.
Yeah, so I'm just going to speed through this last little bit, but I just really wanted to sort of stress the importance of celebrating the work that's being done, at a time that's probably one of the most challenging times for our teachers. They are spread so thin. They're, coming out of the challenges of COVID and the online teaching, all of this work that we've been engaged in sort of fell during that same timeline. So, really feel like we need to celebrate and have a little bit of good news story. I think really acknowledging progress that we're seeing with our students, looking at our data and looking for that progress, even if it's small progress for some students, really celebrating those steps towards better reading achievement. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of excitement. And the other piece that I think is really important is, and you can flip slides there, Chris, is growing your network of experts. Nobody has all of the answers. The answers don't rest in just one person. So really looking beyond yourself or even your own school and community and looking broadly. There's so much amazing work that's happening, across Ontario, across Canada, North America, and globally. And if there's one thing that I've noticed over the last, several years, is that this community that is moving this work forward are among the most generous souls that I've ever encountered, so generous with their time and expertise, complete strangers to me. I've been able to, communicate with sort of in Twitterverse and set up Teams meetings, and they generously give their time to meet with our team. And just, collaboratively problem solve issues that, everybody's encountering as we're moving this work forward. So, I just really encourage people to reach out to other people, and, just broaden your network of experts, because there are a lot of people doing really, really great work.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you so much. So just a couple of closing thoughts. So it would be nice to say that our work was done, but in reality, I feel like we can now say we've transitioned perhaps past the awareness stage and are firmly in the early implementation stage with our assessments, our instruction, our intervention program, especially with those younger students. Next steps and challenges for us. So understanding how instruction of core literacy skills and all the concepts on Scarborough's rope are taught to junior, intermediate, and struggling students in any grade is the immediate learning that's ahead of us. Explicit PD on writing as well as reading is identified as a system need, and more effectively adapting literacy intervention for older tier 3 students that is both effective and engaging is work that has progressed onto our short list. And it's hard to not be frustrated as the need for additional instruction and support for both educators and students beyond primary is urgent. But the inability to move all of the pieces at once and the reality of that has led us to the belief that our decision to begin our work with the early literacy educators is the way to eventually break the chain, and that chain being broken really by improved tier 1 classroom instruction. And so, yeah, Kara, I'd actually like to turn it back to you just for some closing thoughts.
Yeah, so when I started at the beginning of the presentation, I talked about the pre-referral meetings being that genesis for the work that began. And so I just sort of wanted to share this experience that I just had, which was, so I'm at the very end of my career. I'm retiring in next month. So I actually participated in my last pre-referral meeting a couple of days ago at one of our rural schools. And at that meeting, so this is a K-8 school, when the teachers came to present their students, not one teacher mentioned a reading level. The principal was able to pull up Acadience data and core phonics survey data. The conversations around the table were about core literacy skills. The teachers were immediately able to identify the skills the kids had and what the next steps were going to be. They were talking about the resources that they were using and the instructional routines that they were going to be using to support this work. The teachers were talking about students who previously had been on modified days because they were refusing to come to school, who were now, attending full days, learning to read, feeling successful. And literally teacher after teacher after teacher who came into this meeting, they just kept saying the same things, how they were feeling so great about what was happening in their classrooms. They were feeling effective at supporting every student in their class. So it was just like a really full circle moment for me of where we started, and then sort of as I step out, sort of where we've landed. And I have full confidence that this work will be sustained, and just feeling really, really hopeful.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kara. Okay, that is the end of our formal presentation. Alicia, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And I love how you ended there, Kara, with bringing it back full circle. That description of that pre-referral meeting is, I think, the goal that we're all hoping for. So it's amazing to hear that you had that experience, and congratulations on your retirement coming up. That's wonderful. I have a lot of questions, but I also have some thoughts because I was listening along as well. And of course, I'll get to my questions first and then everybody else's. So just kidding. But one thing that you talked about was about celebrating success. And before we get into the questions, I just wanted to let everyone know about Kara's, but celebrating Kara's success and the success of the entire Near North team. So just about a month ago, I was really thrilled to be able to present Kara with an Ontario Literacy Leader Award at the IDA Ontario conference. So congratulations on that as well, Kara, and congratulations on your retirement. And now I'll move to the questions. So we did have quite a few questions about just backtracking to those webinars that you offered. That initial round of PD that you said was really the catalyst that kind of sparked the interest and got things moving. So we had a few people asking about those. They wanted to know, was this something that was optional for teachers, or were teachers required to attend? When did they happen? Was this something that happened during the day? Was it in the evening? Were they recorded so that teachers could watch them at a later date? Somebody want to answer those sort of practical pieces?
Yeah, Chris, do you want to jump into and respond to that?
Yeah, no, it wasn't mandated. It was during the initial school closures, and teachers, it was in the early phases of remote learning. So the technology had been deployed. And I think at in those first months, I think there was a requirement of about 60 minutes of instruction per day per student. It was a finite number. So there was time where we could leverage for professional learning opportunities. So we had a variety of webinars running during that time. And the early literacy webinars were one of, and staff would opt in, but again, incredibly well attended. I think there was one that was just under 400 attendees. So, that's almost 60% of our K-12 teaching allocation. So, again, there was keen interest. I think the timing was very good in terms of, again, the technology was, people were remote working from home. And this was just timely information for them to receive.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, I feel like a part of our journey is really around COVID and some of the crazy context that has provided the world, because now we know that people are very kind of webinared out, and so I would wonder, even as wonderful as the content was, if a different model wouldn't be more effective at this time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, because you started this work so long ago, because this is something that was on your radar, you were ideally positioned to take advantage really of that period of time that we had. Someone else actually this is from New Brunswick, described that period of time. They were similarly ready to go and ready to start the learning. They described it as like, finally, we could land the plane so that we could fix it for a few minutes, because beyond that, they've been trying to fix the plane while they fly it. So that,
right.
It takes you were in that good position, obviously, because you had a group of people in your board who were looking at these issues and willing to prioritize that. So kudos to you. I don't call that luck. I call that good planning. So well, we're good for that. There were also quite a few questions about French immersion. How are you supporting the French immersion teachers in your board? Specifically, there were some questions about resources for French immersion, and also the screening in French immersion, if you're doing that, and what tools you're using.
Yeah, Kara, are you able to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, a big area of need for sure in our board. And it was actually one of the reasons why we gravitated towards Acadians. Actually, it was because they were initiating the project around EDIPEL, and we certainly knew that if there was a screener that we could use across the system as well, in our French immersion space, that was certainly a draw. And we were interested in becoming part of that pilot research that was being done.
And we have, right? So
we have, and we are part
all
of
of
that.
our immersion schools involved in that.
Yeah, and again, expanding, our network of experts. We reached out to Nancy Weiss early on, and she did a session with us to help. And since we've been sort of, accessing other expertise around the province to help us, wrestle with some of the issues. And what's particularly challenging is French immersion is so different from board to board and school to school as far as when kids start in French immersion. There's some where their English instruction doesn't, continues up until, end of SK, and then, the French stuff starts in grade 1. And, everybody seems to have a different way of doing their offering the French immersion program. So we're struggling a little bit with that, how to when would we use the measures, the English measures from Acadians? When, at what point would it be more appropriate to use the measures from EDAPAL? Those conversations are all happening. We've certainly trained many French immersion teachers on the EDAPAL tool. And then as far as resources, we are accessing everything that we can find. Lots of great resources on IDA's website, any, lexicography from Michel Minor-Corriveau, like anything that we can get our hands on, we are certainly putting into our system, but continues to be an area of need and challenge for us, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that's really worth highlighting, Kara, is that challenge piece. Like it doesn't feel, at least at this point in our learning, it doesn't feel as clear as some of the other work that we've done. Like it feels like there's still learning and yeah, things that we really need to get our heads around and feel solid about.
Yeah, that question of screening in a French immersion setting is
Mhm.
definitely a tricky one. And,
Mhm.
when to do it in English and what to do, when to switch to French and what to do in English and what to do in French. That's
Mhm.
definitely a tricky thing to navigate. And I know that's something that all the school boards in Ontario are navigating. So I hope that we can get people together to talk about that and share what is working for sure. We had a couple of other questions about additional assessments that you're using. So you had talked about progress monitoring, you had talked about, I think, core phonics. But in addition to your screening, what other diagnostic assessment tools are you using? And can I ask as well about, you talked about de-implementation. And so, Kara, you mentioned that at the last meeting, there was no mention of the reading levels. So has that been de-implemented across the board, or is that an ongoing process?
Yeah.
I can jump on that one. So we have we've worked collaboratively with our federation partners over the last number of years to talk about diagnostic assessment. Through the lens of PPM 155, also through the lens of the collective agreement, honoring professional judgment, but also ensuring that teachers have the very best diagnostic assessments to understand what students' needs are and how to respond. So as part of that conversation, boards are required to establish a list of diagnostic tools. We call ours an assessment framework. It's a diagnostic assessment framework. And we're in the process of reviewing all of the tools that are on there. So at this time, running records would still sit on that. But again, we're moving. And again, I think it's intentional not to just pull the rug out from under people, but we're moving intentionally away from running records. In this fall, we'll see some changes to that assessment framework. I want to emphasize the importance of having conversations with all groups within the organization on that, because I think without developing an understanding as to why we're making this change and this shift, it could lead to unintended consequences. I'll just leave it there. But beyond the screening tools, Acadians, we have diagnostic assessment tools, phonics. We have the core measures, multiple measures, resource, core phonics, which includes the core phonics survey. We also have the Acadians progress monitoring tools on the intervention side. We have Haggerty is identified. Haggerty has built-in assessments, diagnostic assessments as well, to support an understanding of growth over time, looking at phonemic awareness. But again, it's right now it's an evolving list because the work is so rapidly evolving.
Yeah, if I can jump in with just a couple of comments around those pieces. So yeah, so also we have like kids who are participating in Lexia Power Up. There's some placement there that has a diagnostic quality to it. The same is true. We haven't put Lexia Core 5 out system wide, but we have a fairly large number of schools piloting it, with some pretty positive feedback coming back from those people. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the core phonics survey. So we knew that we needed to have a tool for educators once those students were kind of, flagged, if you will, on the Acadian screening. We needed to have a diagnostic tool to go a little bit deeper. And our decision to go with the core phonics survey, I would say, and Kara, please add to this, but I would say it had a lot to do with just the precision and the simplicity of the tool. It was, we were able to use paper and pencil, easy to use, photocopy, quick to do the assessment, and very, very precise about what would be the needs and next steps for students.
That's great. I loved your description of building the local knowledge in the school and taking your intervention teachers that were already in the school, or your support teachers that were in the school, and really building that depth of knowledge for them. When you were talking about doing the biweekly training with them, I'm assuming that given your geography that was done via Zoom. Would that be a good assumption?
Yes.
One thing you didn't mention was how long that process lasted. So I was just wondering, like, that support that you were providing to those teachers to really build them into the local experts, how long did that take, and who was involved in that?
So that would have been, just less than half a year, I would say.
I would say it was the whole year. I think we started early fall and we were still offering sessions in the spring. There had to have been, there were chunks of time where it wasn't every 2 weeks, but I think training continued right through to the spring. Yeah.
Well, okay, maybe. Yeah. Anyway, less than a year, but it didn't go beyond that year.
Great. So in that period of time, in addition to the webinars that Kara was running, were you tapping into any other courses? Were you providing books and beyond the ones that you showed in the screenshot? But was there? I noticed some school boards are doing book clubs and things like that. Were there any of those pieces that were involved in that training, or was it entirely developed in-house by Kara and your team?
Yeah, so I would highlight whenever I heard of webinars that were being offered, and so many amazing free of charge webinars, the webinars through IDA and other places. We were always identifying those for our teachers, great free training through really great reading, attend these sessions. And we did provide some instructional resources, things like what the core, remember the actual name of the resource, the core source book, I think it's called. So we had those, copies of those measures, the multiple measures. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we didn't get to the point yet where we were having those informal book club podcast types of groups going on yet. That's certainly a next step for us.
I would say one of the most powerful examples of professional learning would be the LIFT projects, though. And again, that grew over, I think this is the second cycle of LIFT, year 2 from the ministry funded projects. But we've seen in year 1 significant interest in literacy learning projects. And this year it's, as I mentioned, 17 of 21 projects. These are teacher-driven projects, teacher-initiated projects are related to this work.
That's great. Could you just give me an example of what one of those projects would be?
Well, Steve, maybe you could speak to the ELI, the multi-school ELI project that was led by the literacy intervention teacher of Vincent Macie.
I can speak to a little bit, and Kara was also part of that, and she may have some things she wanted to add. So this was an example of an ELI teacher wanting to get together a small group of interested other literacy intervention teachers, and they had a really specific focus. And their focus was, well, what do we do about the kids who we are throwing our best at them, and they're still not progressing satisfactorily. And so it was really, every literacy intervention came with those specific students and their data, and put it on the table, and they really delved into it in a really collaborative analysis and conversation. There was professional learning, and different articles and pieces like that were part of that lift. So I think it was a really nice project. Kara, do you want to add more to that?
Just one thing, Steve, in terms of the model, I want to emphasize too that the LIFT projects are paired with a critical friend that would be like a content expert. So in this case, Kara, I think you were the critical friend to this group. But so it might be a school-based literacy facilitator who's paired, but they become I don't want to say they're not coordinating the project, but they're a critical friend to the project. So again, helping orienting the staff to the appropriate resources and the instructional approaches and so forth.
Well, that's a really good way to do it.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, you wanted to jump back in there?
Can I go back to just one point, because I think it's really important. So when I'm back to the previous question around the Eli teachers and the learning they received during that period of time, and again, I think it was really important in that it was primarily in-house, but more than just being in-house, it was grounded in the student work. The student work was on the desk, right? We had them piloting different resources and doing different assessments with their kids, and that was really driving and generating the learning that Kara would incorporate each session. So each session had, we had slide decks that Kara would have created with learning, and then we would have, a little bit more of a practical piece to it. So it was lots of really good and important learning.
That's great. Yeah, I'm just going to do a couple more quick questions. We did have someone ask about the training that you're providing to principals. I think that is such an important piece. We talked a lot about the teachers and these lead teachers that you have. I think you mentioned a little bit about principals, but could you just tell us a little bit more about what you're doing to support, I guess, not just principals, but superintendents as well, the people that manage this work?
Kara, do you want to speak to the, I'm thinking about the leadership development meeting where you facilitated a workshop?
Yeah, I think it was obvious to us that if we were asking teachers to change what they were doing, we needed to make sure that principals knew enough of the information that they could support the work in their buildings. So yeah, so I think it was in the fall, September, October of this past year, we held a session for principals where I was able to sort of, talk about the why these changes were being made. They had all along the journey been sort of kept abreast of, that what we were doing, but in a more general sense. So this was really an opportunity to talk about why we were doing it, what was going to look different in their schools. And then we sort of finished the session with our school-based literacy facilitators, looking at samples of Acadian's data, having that up on the big screen, and sort of giving that first look to the principals of the power of the information that could be collected from this. So I feel like that was a real catalyst for momentum within all of the schools. I think after that training, certainly had many principals reaching out, and then sort of that real school approach now, instead of just, a few teachers here and there who were really engaging in the work. It felt more like it was becoming a school pushed program or initiative. So I think that fall was a big turning point.
I think I just, the caution I have in our response to this is, Steve made a comment at nearing the end of the presentation that we feel like we've transitioned from awareness to early implementation, and I think it's fair to acknowledge that our school leaders are in different places, and there's still work to be done to bring them to a common deep understanding of what this work looks like and how to lead it within a school. So that work has begun, certainly. We've seen significant growth. We've heard the conversations change. The measures that matter have changed when we talk about improvement planning and responding to needs, but it's very much we're in the sort of the crux of the work right now.
Thank you. And we're just at time. But before I let you go, I would just like to ask each of you if you wanted to say a few closing words, I recognize that you, as you described, moved from awareness to early implementation. But I do think, and I do see your board as being one that's a couple of steps further ahead in the process than many other boards in Ontario and certainly across Canada. So recognizing that you're a little bit further in the journey, what advice would each of you give to other educators and school leaders who are just starting out this work or might be just looking to get started? So if maybe each of you want to just give your last parting words.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, I'll start. I think a piece that sort of stands out to me is I think find your experts wherever they exist in your organization. And sometimes they're sitting maybe where you're not expecting to find them. I think the complexity of the work that's ahead requires a level of expertise. Some pieces are easier to move forward. Some pieces are really complex. So I think, you know, when Chris spoke of working beyond our silos, I think that's a really critical piece. There's expertise living in other places. And if you don't have in your board, again, look broadly outside of your immediate district.
Do you want me to go, Chris, and then you can have final word?
Sure.
Okay. So I have to say two. I can't just say one. So long game. I think you have to realize that this work is not going to happen overnight. But at the same time, like, that's not an excuse to ignore the urgency in the work. And I think that's really critical. And trying to find that balance. You know, Chris talked about it earlier in the presentation about not overwhelming people and just really paying a lot of attention to how people are receiving things and moving forward. The second piece I really wanted to add is just the recommendation to continue to invest in professional learning, where you have educator alongside educator. It is the best, and it opens up so many people to learning in ways that I don't think any other model does.
And I would say relationships and communication are going to be critical in any systemic shift. And I think you have to anticipate where the areas of tension are going to be and initiate conversations now. Again, reinforcing the why behind the what. And then along the way, moving from compliance to collaborative structures. I think anytime we can engage teachers in meaningful collaboration where they see that their voice is heard and they're part of the work, and noticing that and naming that, it helps to move the work forward and build momentum. We had Kara in our conversations preparing for this. We used the sort of the analogy of the tug of war. And there was a time when I think Kara felt like she was the only person pulling on the rope. And over time, and through the evolving relationships, I think more and more people are pulling the rope in the same direction. And that's one of the reasons why we feel like we've got traction.
Yeah, well said.
Very well said, all of you. Thank you very much for sharing your journey with us and for joining us for this Spotlight webinar series. And thank you to everyone who's watching this either live or will be watching the recording later. I hope that you will join us for our next Spotlight as well. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.